In the autumn of 1909, a remarkable photograph was taken from the gondola of the newly developed Zephyr-class dirigible, hovering 800 feet above the small town of Millbrook Valley, Pennsylvania. The image, captured by pioneer aerial photographer Jonathan Hartwell, showed the town in crisp detail. Neat rows of houses, the central church spire, tree-lined streets, and dozens of townspeople going about their daily business. To most observers, it was simply a fascinating novelty of modern aviation and photography. But to Dr. Elena Vasquez, a meticulous photographic analyst working for a private research consortium in Philadelphia, this seemingly innocent photograph would become the center of an investigation that challenged everything she understood about reality itself. Dr. Vasquez had spent 3 years analyzing photographs for evidence of tampering, forgery, and optical illusions. Her expertise in light behavior and shadow mechanics made her the perfect candidate to examine unusual photographic specimens. When the Millbrook Valley photograph arrived at her laboratory desk on a cold November morning, she approached it with her usual methodical precision. Using a magnifying glass and precise measuring tools, she began her standard analysis of light sources, shadow angles, and perspective consistency. It was during her 3rd hour of examination that she noticed something that made her pause. The shadows cast by the buildings aligned perfectly with a single light source, the sun, positioned in the southeastern portion of the sky based on the angle and length of the shadows. The tree shadows followed the same consistent pattern. Everything appeared normal until she focused on the human figures scattered throughout the photograph. Their shadows, while subtle in their deviation, were rotated approximately 3 to 4 degrees counterclockwise from where they should have been. Dr. Vasquez rechecked her measurements multiple times using different instruments and techniques. The anomaly persisted. The shadows of roughly 37 townspeople visible in the photograph were consistently misaligned with the established light source. This was not a photographic error or a trick of perspective. It was physically impossible under normal circumstances. Knowing that such a finding would be met with skepticism, Dr. Vasquez meticulously documented her observations before approaching her superior, Professor Marcus Thornfield, the lead investigator of their research team. Professor Thornfield had built his reputation on debunking supernatural claims through rigorous scientific analysis, and he approached Dr. Vasquez's findings with his characteristic skepticism. Elena, you're suggesting that the laws of physics were suspended for these specific individuals while remaining intact for everything else in the photograph, Professor Thornfield said, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles as he examined her documentation. The more logical explanation is a flaw in the photographic process, or perhaps multiple exposures that weren't properly accounted for. But Dr. Vasquez had anticipated this objection. She had spent additional hours creating overlay transparencies of different sections of the photograph, demonstrating that the shadow angles were consistent within their respective categories. Buildings and natural objects followed one pattern, while human figures followed another. The precision of this division ruled out random photographic errors. Marcus, look at this overlay, Doctor, Vasquez insisted, placing the transparent sheets over the original photograph. If this were a double exposure or processing error, we would see inconsistencies throughout the image. Instead, we have 2 perfectly consistent shadow patterns operating simultaneously within the same frame. The building at coordinates C7 shows shadow angle of 42 degrees southeast. Every other structure follows this pattern precisely. But Mrs. Henderson, standing in front of the general store, casts a shadow at 39 degrees southeast. This 3-degree variance appears in every human figure I've measured. The specificity and consistency of the anomaly began to chip away at Professor Thornfield's skepticism. He assigned additional team members to verify Dr. Vasquez's measurements independently when their results confirmed the shadow discrepancies. The investigation officially expanded beyond simple photographic analysis. Dr. Vasquez proposed a theory that challenged conventional understanding. What if this photograph captured a moment when these townspeople were temporarily operating under different physical laws? Not different geography, not a different time of day, but as if they were briefly existing in a space where the sun occupied a different position relative to their bodies alone. To understand the context surrounding this impossible photograph, the team contacted local historian William Ashford, a 73-year-old scholar who had dedicated his life to documenting Millbrook Valley's history. Mr. Ashford had heard whispers of unusual events throughout the town's past, stories that most dismissed as folklore, but which he had carefully cataloged in his personal archives. The old-timers spoke of something they called the sun's shift, Mr. Ashford explained during his interview with the investigation team. According to local oral tradition, every 20 to 30 years, the town would experience what they described as day when shadows fell wrong. People would notice their own shadows appearing different from everything around them. Most attributed it to imagination or tricks of light, but the stories have persisted since the town's founding in 1847. Mr. Ashford provided the team with copies of diary entries, newspaper clippings, and town meeting minutes that referenced these events. A diary entry from 1878 described a morning when the shadows of the congregation fell as if we stood under a different sun, though the church building's shadow remained true. Another account from 1885 mentioned townspeople gathering to compare their shadows, noting they all appeared rotated in the same direction. The historical context provided by Mr. Ashford gave credence to Dr. Vasquez's photographic evidence, but the team needed access to the original photographic plate to conduct more detailed analysis. This led them to Margaret Sinclair, the head archivist at the Pennsylvania Historical Society, where the original glass plate negative had been preserved since 1910. Mrs. Sinclair was initially hesitant to allow such intensive analysis of the fragile historical artifact, but the team's credentials and the potential historical significance of their findings convinced her to grant access under strict supervision. This plate has been in our collection for 15 years, she explained as she carefully retrieved the glass negative from its protective housing. It's one of the earliest aerial photographs taken in Pennsylvania, and we've always considered it a remarkable example of early aviation photography. Using the most advanced photographic scanning equipment available in 1925, the team created extremely high-resolution reproductions of the original plate. The enhanced detail revealed information invisible to standard examination techniques. Within the anomalous shadows of the human figures, faint geometric patterns became visible, not random artifacts or grain, but deliberate structures that appeared to have been embedded within the shadow formations themselves. Dr. Vasquez spent weeks analyzing these internal patterns, discovering they followed mathematical relationships that suggested intentional design rather than natural occurrence. The patterns varied from figure to figure, but maintained consistent geometric principles throughout. Using grid analysis and pattern recognition techniques, She began to suspect these shapes might represent some form of communication or coding system. Professor Thornfield, now fully convinced of the anomaly's authenticity, worked alongside Dr. Vasquez to map out the shadow patterns systematically. They discovered that the geometric shapes, when arranged according to the physical positions of the people in the photograph, formed a larger composite pattern. This meta-pattern resembled symbols they had seen in Mr. Ashford's historical documents. The breakthrough came when Mr. Ashford provided them with a cipher key found in the personal papers of Millbrook Valley's founder, Jeremiah Mills. The cipher had been dismissed by previous historians as the eccentric hobby of an educated man, but when applied to the shadow patterns, it began to yield coherent results. Working late into the night in Dr. Vasquez's laboratory, the team applied the historical cipher to the geometric patterns embedded in the anomalous shadows. The decoding process was painstaking, requiring precise measurements and multiple cross-references, but gradually a message began to emerge from the shadows themselves. The decoded message was brief, but chilling. "They are here." The simplicity of the warning belied its profound implications. Someone or something had used the townspeople of Millbrook Valley as unwitting messengers, encoding a warning into the very fabric of reality by manipulating their shadows. The precision required for such a feat suggested intelligence and capabilities far beyond human understanding in 1909 or 1925. Professor Thornfield and Dr. Vasquez spent additional weeks verifying their decoding methodology and exploring alternative interpretations of the patterns. Every approach yielded the same result. The message was consistent, deliberate, and impossible to dismiss as coincidence or misinterpretation. The investigation had revealed that the 1909 aerial photograph had captured more than just a moment in time. It had documented an event where the townspeople of Millbrook Valley had been briefly utilized as instruments of communication by an unknown intelligence. Their shadows had been manipulated to carry a warning across time embedded in the photographic record for those with the knowledge and tools to decipher it. The team faced a difficult decision regarding their findings. The evidence was overwhelming, the methodology sound, and the implications staggering. However, releasing such information to the public could cause widespread panic and undermine faith in the fundamental laws of physics that governed everyday life. After extensive deliberation, Professor Thornfield made the decision to classify their findings and limit knowledge of the discovery to the immediate research team. "Our responsibility," he told Dr. Vasquez, "is not just to discover truth, but to consider the consequences of that truth's revelation. The warning has been delivered and received. Our next obligation is to determine whether similar events have occurred elsewhere and might occur again." The team established a new protocol for analyzing historical photographs, specifically searching for shadow anomalies that might indicate similar events. They discreetly contacted archives, museums, and private collectors, requesting access to aerial and group photographs taken during the periods suggested by Mr. Ashford's historical research. Dr. Vasquez developed specialized techniques for detecting the subtle shadow inconsistencies that had led to their discovery. She created training materials for a select group of researchers who could continue the investigation without fully understanding its implications until absolutely necessary. As their official investigation concluded, Professor Thornfield locked the original files in a secure vault, accessible only to future researchers with appropriate clearance and need. The Millbrook Valley photograph was returned to Mrs. Sinclair's archive, where it resumed its quiet existence as a remarkable example of early aerial photography. But the investigation's true conclusion came weeks later when Dr. Vasquez, now trained to recognize the telltale signs of shadow anomalies, discovered another photograph in a Chicago museum's collection. Taken in 1887 from the top of a newly constructed skyscraper, it showed a crowded street scene below. At first glance, it appeared completely normal. However, when Dr. Vasquez applied her analytical techniques to the photograph, she found the same impossible pattern. Human shadows misaligned with their environmental context by precisely 3 degrees, containing the same geometric patterns within their structure. The warning encoded in the shadows of Chicago citizens was identical to the message found in Millbrook Valley. They are here. The discovery confirmed Professor Thornfield's suspicions that the 1909 event was not isolated. Whatever intelligence had manipulated the townspeople's shadows to deliver its warning had been active for decades, possibly longer. The consistency of the message suggested an ongoing presence rather than a brief visitation. Dr. Vasquez began to understand the true scope of what they had uncovered. This was not simply a supernatural occurrence, but evidence of a sophisticated communication network that had been operating beneath human awareness for generations. The precision required to manipulate shadows while leaving all other physical laws intact suggested technology or abilities that transcended current scientific understanding. The implications extended far beyond historical curiosity. If these entities could manipulate the fundamental properties of light and shadow, what other aspects of reality might they influence? Dr. Vasquez found herself questioning every photograph she had previously analyzed, wondering how many other messages might have been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right analytical approach to reveal them. Professor Thornfield, meanwhile, had begun developing a theoretical framework for understanding how such manipulation might be possible. His preliminary calculations suggested that the shadow alterations required precise control over electromagnetic fields in ways that current physics could not explain. The energy expenditure alone should have been detectable through other means, yet no such anomalies had been recorded during the documented events. The team established a secure communication network with select researchers at other institutions, carefully sharing their methodology without revealing the full context of their discoveries. Within months, reports began arriving of similar anomalies found in photographs from Boston, New Orleans, and San Francisco. The pattern was consistent. Crowds of people with shadows that defied physics, all containing the same geometric encoding, all delivering the identical message. What troubled Dr. Vasquez most was the realization that these manifestations appeared to be increasing in frequency. The historical records suggested events occurring every 20 to 30 years in individual locations, but their expanded investigation revealed multiple simultaneous occurrences across different cities during the same time periods. This suggested either a coordinated effort or a phenomenon that was growing stronger and more widespread. The team also discovered that the affected individuals in each photograph shared certain characteristics. They were predominantly adults between the ages of 25 and 55, engaged in routine daily activities and showed no awareness of their participation in the shadow manipulation. Medical records, where available, indicated no unusual health effects or behavioral changes following these events. The selection criteria remained a mystery, but the consistency across locations implied a purposeful choosing rather than random occurrence. Most disturbing was Professor Thornfield's calculation that if the frequency of events continued to increase at the observed rate, shadow manipulations might soon become detectable to casual observers rather than requiring specialized analysis. The implications of widespread public awareness of such phenomena could fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of reality and their place within it. Standing in her laboratory, examining the Chicago photograph under magnification, Dr. Vasquez felt the weight of knowledge that few humans would ever possess. The shadows that people cast every day, taken for granted as simple physics, could apparently be manipulated by forces beyond human understanding to carry messages across time and space. She carefully filed the Chicago photograph alongside her other evidence, knowing that somewhere in archives around the world, more examples likely waited to be discovered. The investigation had ended, but the broader mystery had just begun. And in the shadows cast by ordinary people going about their daily lives, warnings from an unknown intelligence continued to wait patiently for those with the knowledge to read them.